Hello, everyone. Good afternoon or good morning if you're in a different time zone. Thank you so much for joining us again for the third installment of our webinar series, Learning from Liaisons, Evictions, ARP strategies, and more, of course. My name is Alian Anderson, and I am the Policy and Outreach Associate for Schoolhouse Connection, and I am joined by our co-host, Miss Barbara Duffield, the wonderful Executive Director of Schoolhouse. And I'm also pleased to introduce our special guest for today, Rebecca Beach, joining us all the way from Cincinnati, Ohio. And Rebecca is coming from Cincinnati Public Schools. And before I turn over to Rebecca, I just want to do a couple of housekeeping things before we dive in. So we will be providing handouts today. If you were here for our other installments, I hope you were. We had links going in the chat with resources. You can now find the links in a handout in one document. And Rebecca was so kind to also share a resource that everyone can look to, which she'll explain and speak about further, but you'll also find that in your handout. A recording of the webinar will also be sent to everyone once it's done, so you'll be able to access this and the materials again online on schoolhouseconnection.org/archived webinars. And without further ado, we will start. So Rebecca, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. And I was just wondering if you could just go ahead and tell us a little bit about your program, tell us about Project Connect, your district, and what's going on in Cincinnati.
Sure, yes. My name is Rebecca Beach, and I manage the program in Cincinnati Public Schools serving children experiencing homelessness. We are called Project Connect, and we're a team of about 13 now, and we serve students identified as experiencing homelessness in Cincinnati Public Schools. We average about 3,500 students a year, which is about a third of our population. We are a large urban district, and so we do have high needs within our district, and our program has various positions from individuals serving students at the preschool level. We have 2 individuals who serve students at the elementary school level. We have a high school liaison, and then we have a high school academic coach who works with our young men at some of our high numbers high schools, and we have a high school liaison who is site-based at some of our high schools. We have somebody housed at our local youth shelter. We have a school counselor who works with our seniors specifically just to try to provide graduation support. And then we have a social worker who works with our EL population. And we have somebody who works with our transportation department specifically to ensure that our students are receiving timely and effective transportation.
Awesome, thank you so much. So then my next question for you is, can you tell us a little bit about some of the partnerships you've had or any of the efforts that you've been doing to address evictions that have been going on in your community?
Sure. I think nationally, we've probably all noticed that there is definitely a trend of lack of affordable housing. In Cincinnati, that has really become a crisis, and we are seeing families being evicted at alarming rates. And so in an attempt to kind of reach these families even before they are evicted, we have partnered with the University of Cincinnati's law department and the Evictions Courts here in our city. They have a unique partnership in Cincinnati whereby University of Cincinnati School of Law provides legal services for families facing eviction. And what I didn't know when I initiated this work was that families who are facing eviction typically are not represented. They said that 90% of families are not represented, so they don't actually know their legal rights a lot of the time. And so they actually have housed University of Cincinnati law students at our municipal courts to work with families facing eviction. And so we went into a partnership where we provide proactive outreach to these families. So we receive data that is available online from the clerk of courts of families who are facing eviction, and we reach out to those families just to not only assess their eligibility, but to find out what we can do to provide support if they become evicted or to prevent eviction. So we look at it as proactive outreach. We recently created an MOU to make that process a little easier. We were working backwards. So we were looking at the Clerk of Court's website and finding the names of parents who were getting evicted who had addresses within our district, and then searching under the parents to find out if they had students attached to their name. So that was a lot of work. And what we were able to work out is that the University of Cincinnati will filter those cases to us and send us a weekly spreadsheet listing the families who have children in the Cincinnati Public School District, so that we are actually just getting the information and we can reach out. So it is going to definitely reduce the amount of time we're investing in trying to figure out who these families are. I will say that the partnership has been really effective for looking at our average numbers. We are identifying about 70 students a month from these referrals. And we were having a conversation before we came on today talking about who qualifies, and it's really a case-by-case situation. So if we contact a family and they say that they've found housing, we don't obviously identify them as experiencing homelessness, or if they found funding to prevent the eviction. But if they tell us that they are being evicted, they have nowhere to go, they're planning to go stay with, grandma or sister or whoever, then we do feel like they are lacking fixed, adequate, and permanent housing. And so we would not only try to provide resources, but identify them and let them know their educational rights as well.
Okay, thank you, Rebecca. And just one quick note for everyone, because I forgot to mention before, but if you have any questions, feel free to put them into the Q&A panel, which you'll find to the right side of your screen in the GoToWebinar control panel. So, and we'll get to those later. We'll get to those in a bit. But thank you so much, Rebecca. And so another thing that we were speaking about earlier was your partnership with Eviction Courts. So I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about that as well, maybe how you went about collaborating with them to identify families as well, and just how that's been panning out for you.
You're referring to the Eviction Court partnership and just how we got that started? Okay, so actually, we did kind of a team approach to outreach during the pandemic, just because we were finding that it was harder for us to reach students, obviously, when they weren't in school. So we didn't have, as many teachers and social workers and people within the buildings referring kids to us, just because they weren't there. So we had a meeting where we just threw out all kinds of ideas for outreach, and one of my team members suggested partnering with the Eviction Courts. And so we didn't really know how to get started on that. And so I reached out to legal aid, our local legal aid office, who we do work with pretty frequently when we feel like families' rights are being violated. And they gave me a contact for the individual with this School of Law at the University of Cincinnati, who's kind of the point of contact for the Eviction Court partnership. So we met and discussed what I was looking for, and also whether it seemed like that was reasonable to provide this type of outreach. And we decided it was of value to our families, and also to us, because we're able to identify students who we may typically miss. But we also decided that we needed an MOU in place. And so that's where he connected me with the chief of compliance for the evictions courts, and her and I met and talked about the type of data we needed and what they would be able to provide. And we drafted an MOU, which I did send to be shared with you all after this webinar. It's a very simple MOU because there's no exchange of money. It's just data sharing. And that data is public knowledge anyway. And so it made the MOU pretty simple and easy. And I think it could be easily replicated if you were interested in entering in this type of partnership with your evictions court. I will tell you that it keeps us very busy, because these are new referrals on top of the referrals we usually get. But I think it's very important because we are charged with identifying these students. And so to me, it's just really a great, it's a great identification tool and strategy for outreach. We do approach conversations with the families very delicately, so we're not, you know, triggering them or re-traumatizing them, because we know that losing housing is a very traumatic event. And so when we call, we really call as a support, and we call to say, you know, we want you to know that you have these rights, because a lot of our families don't know that their children can remain in the school of origin, which is always scary when you're losing your housing, to think about where your children are going to go to school and how they're going to get to school. So I think that alone just eases our parents' minds. And then we have created an online resource page. So we do send that to our families. We keep that updated really regularly. And on that page, we have the agencies that hold some of the COVID relief funds and different eviction prevention funds. So we're able to share that resource really easily with our families, and they're really appreciative of that, because even if they do end up getting evicted, that page has resources for other housing opportunities, which I will say are slim. We actually did what we called a People's Movement walk around Cincinnati on Tuesday with our local homeless coalition. And they took us around and kind of explained what was going on in the city, and it was very sobering for us. They share with us that in 1990, there were over 5,500 affordable housing units in our city, and now we have less than 800. And they're actually about to tear down another housing community to rebuild it. But of that, only about 20% of those 500 housing units will be affordable housing units. So they're calling that, you know, mixed housing. So we are really in a crisis in our city. And so the difficult part is that when we do reach out to these families who are facing eviction, we don't have a whole lot of resources as far as finding actual housing. We have resources to funding for, you know, rental assistance and down payments. And we even have a collaboration with our local Cincinnati Metropolitan Housing Authority. And that collaboration allows us to have priority referrals for our families. So our families really can get a Section 8 voucher very quickly. But the problem, and I'm sure a lot of you are seeing this, is that even with that voucher in hand, they're not finding housing because there's no housing available. And so that is something that we are really struggling with here in Cincinnati. And it's really concerning. We're not sure how to handle it. Because we do have resources, we just don't have actual homes for families.
I'm going to jump in because there's a question that I think is very much on this topic. I wish it was an answer to the problems that you're seeing and that everyone is seeing. But a question: have you been able to delay evictions for those that get judgment from the court until the student finishes the school year? And is your housing court receptive to that?
That is not something we've been able to do, honestly. I was in conversation with the chief compliance officer with the clerk of courts yesterday, just about the numbers of evictions. And I asked her whether she felt like the moratorium has reduced the number of evictions or really allowed families to extend their time in, you know, their current housing situations. And she said the only time they saw a reduction in evictions was when we initially shut down completely at the beginning of the pandemic, and that was only because the courts were shut down. She said once the courts opened up, evictions actually increased even with the moratorium, and that landlords tended to find other reasons to evict families, which we have been hearing from our families left and right, that landlords are evicting them for noise or for truancy or for, you know, various reasons that we had never heard of before, which is interesting. And I will say that we have had a lot of housing agencies contact the school district to find out if kids are missing school, and we do not share that information with them. They have really been trying to get that information out of us, and it's just something our legal department is on board with me. I do not feel that that's something that we should share, because I think they use that data. Well, I know they use that data to try to evict families. because I think a lot of our property owners would like to get out our low-income families and hike the rent up. So to answer that question, no, that's not something we've been able to work out. Now, we have been able to connect families to funding sources where they were able to pay the rent and remain in their properties, but we have not been able to work out a situation where the courts don't evict on that for that reason. But we do ensure that our students, when it's reasonable and feasible, can remain in their school throughout the end of the school year. So we definitely ensure that we are setting up, even when it's cross-district transportation, you know, whatever the families want.
And we have one more question, Rebecca. What are some of the factors that led to the like such a huge reduction in available affordable housing units? Like, how did it go from 5,500 to 800?
Well, I'm glad you're asking me that question after Tuesday, because we were not really sure what was going on until we took that tour with our homeless coalition. It seems that there is like a group in the city who has, they are buying up a lot of the buildings and then turning them into a market rent buildings. And so what we've seen in Cincinnati is just like gentrification at its finest. The whole demographics of our downtown area look different, feel different. There is model management, a group that is definitely remodeling a lot of older buildings and then, you know, renting out an apartment that would have been $600 a few years ago for now $2,500 a month. So we definitely think, you know, it's, well, and we know it's about money. And I asked the other day, because I was curious as to how this could happen. I said, doesn't CMHA have to have a certain number of, you know, units set aside for families with vouchers? And the answer is yes, but they don't have to be in the same area. So they don't necessarily have to be in the downtown area. So we're seeing a lot of our families being pushed out to the suburbs and pretty far out, really. And so it's challenging for us in the sense that we want to be able to keep these students in our district, but sometimes it's not reasonable for them to travel, you know, a couple hours with changing buses and trying to get here every day. So I think that, you know, gentrification is the reason why this is, you know, happening. Even when it came to the units that we know, there's a neighborhood in our city called Stanley Row, and those are the units where the families are going to be pushed out, basically, so they can be rebuilt. Now, they do have to be rehabbed because the building is very old and does need work, but it's interesting that that's happening now. And it's, in my opinion, I don't know why they can't, you know, rehab segments of the building, but we found out the other day that all of that housing will no longer be affordable housing. Only a certain percentage of the units will be affordable housing, and so a great number of our families will not be able to return to that community. And so it really kind of sickens us because we don't know where they're going to go. And in fact, I was looking at statistics recently and noticed that from our end of year data last school year compared to the end of year data the year before, our numbers of unhoused students, meaning students who had nowhere to go, so who were outside and were not sheltered at all, went from 28 in 2018-19 to 172 in 2019-20. So that's a huge increase, and we frankly expect those numbers to go up and continue to go up. Even our identification has gone up tremendously. When I started, the year I started managing the program, 2017, we had identified about 2,300 students. And last school year, we identified about almost 3,500 students. So there's nowhere for our families to go. Another trend that we're seeing that is interesting to me is that we have families staying in shelter for much longer periods. So they're sitting in shelter with Section 8 vouchers. So that's no longer like the golden ticket to housing because they cannot find housing. And so they'll often be in shelter so long that they then lose the Section 8 voucher because you can only have the voucher for a certain amount of time. So
So this, there's a lot of advocacy at the national level to increase housing choice vouchers, but the vouchers absent housing or absent services to find housing in other areas, is a real challenge. So we're aware of that in our advocacy, and there's got to be a lot of different options for people right now,
Yeah.
from the supply to the rental assistance, and accessing that. And actually, I want to ask one question about accessing rental assistance, and then we're going to pivot to a more hopeful topic,
Yeah.
which is
Downer here.
no, we're keeping it real, and this is
Yeah.
tragically a reality across the country. So Scott, we have to face it, and we have to do something about it.
We do. One thing we found out the other day was the city had made it illegal to be homeless, to experience homelessness in a public place. I didn't know that was a thing.
Yeah.
I mean, I just like, where do people go?
Yeah.
Sorry, Barbara, you said you had a question.
Well, a question, and then we're going to turn it into how you're planning to use the American Rescue Plan Act homeless children and youth dollars. But the
Sure.
question is really, you had mentioned earlier that you have had some success helping families access the emergency rental assistance to prevent the eviction. So I want to hear about that. That's a topic we're really engaging in now, is how do we expedite rental assistance to families? We know there's a lot that's unspent. We know schools are great ways to find families and assist families. So a question on that, and then you can just go ahead and just pivot to ARP on the heels of that.
Okay, so one of the things I think is really important is developing like direct referral processes to agencies that are holding funds, and kind of getting on their radar so that they know who we are and that we have direct access to the clients who they should be serving. And so we have a partnership with our local JFS, and they have some of these funds. And so we created just a direct referral process with them. So we refer our families, they reach out to the families, and they really do understand that, our families are in crisis, and the sooner this can be done, the better. So we have a lot of success with that partnership. There are other agencies that do take longer. And we are, well, I'll talk about that because we are hiring somebody with the ARP funds to kind of work out direct referral processes with some of these other agencies. But two of our really valuable partnerships are the partnerships with our Department of Jobs and Family Services, where we do have the direct referral process. And we have a point of contact in our department and a point of contact in their department. And so literally we get the family's information, we send the referral, and they typically reach out that day to access those funds. And then again, the partnership with the Cincinnati Metropolitan Housing Authority. There is a third partner in that kind of relationship, and that's the United Way. So what we don't have the time to case manage housing for our families. And I expressed that when I met with the Cincinnati Metropolitan Housing Authority. So I reached out to the United Way, and they have a team, at least in Cincinnati, of people who are working with families receiving COVID relief dollars. So when we send the referral to CMHA, they take over the case management piece and help to expedite that process with them as well. So we are seeing our families get the vouchers within 30 days. And we are seeing families accessing rental relief funds pretty quickly, at least within 30 days, but usually sooner, through our partnership with Jobs and Family Services. We also know that the Community Action Agency has funding. We do have a partnership with them for our Head Start referrals, so I'm hoping to expand on that partnership for these COVID relief funds as well. Does that answer the question?
It does. And we were talking earlier, ARP, HCY, American Rescue Plan, Homeless Children Youth Act, round 1 and round 2. You could share a little bit about both of them.
Well, I'll tell you, I just found out about round 2 this week. So I'm working on that. But with round 1, we just posted a couple of positions that we are funding through the ARP round 1. One is an identification and housing specialist. So this person is going to actually work almost in a case management sense to provide wraparound services to our families for housing. So their job is going to be to send these referrals to CMHA, to work with Jobs and Family Services to ensure that we're accessing their funding quickly, and to build those partnerships I was just talking about with other agencies And also, we have added a little component to that. We are going to try to start working with our families on home ownership, because we see that as a way out of homelessness. We know that home ownership is usually less expensive than rent, at least from what we're seeing. The rent is really ridiculous. And, you know, we know our families can actually pay less and own a home. So that's one of my goals with this position. They will also work with our shelters as a liaison for our shelters, meeting weekly or monthly with each shelter to just review each family's situation, see if they can provide support, and also review attendance to see if there are any barriers for our students in shelter. So I'm calling that position identification and housing specialist. The next position that I've posted with those funds is a social, emotional, and enrichment learning coordinator. So this position will work with our students who have experienced significant trauma to ensure that they're receiving counseling and maybe mental health services through the schools or through community partners who we work with for therapeutic services. Making sure that we are connecting those families to our community learning centers to access additional academic supports, as well as social emotional supports, enrichment activities, just things to kind of mitigate some of the trauma that students are experiencing. Especially we're finding after the kind of the isolation of COVID, we know that COVID impacted students who were not experiencing homelessness, and so we imagine that our students experiencing homelessness really were impacted even at a greater level. I recently just had a conversation with my 12-year-old because I feel like his social skills have kind of plummeted since, you know, returning to school. I mean, he's always looking at his phone or a computer, you know, and so we want to make sure that we are providing like enriching experiences for our children to get them off of devices and interacting and building on those social emotional skills, and even just skills to be able to respond appropriately in the school setting and at home. And so that position is going to also work with each school to identify and keep a database of what supports are offered in each school. So that way we know what services each school offers, because we have over 52 schools, and how we can set up direct referral processes for mental health referrals at those schools. We're also going to continue something that we started during COVID, which we call Wellness on Wheels, which was something I was really passionate about. We started taking medical services out to shelters on Saturdays and hosting wellness clinics for our families. And so each child would get a full physical and a vision and hearing screening. The parents were provided with lifestyle coaching, so they talked about trauma with the parents, nutrition, activities to kind of help with stress, because we know our parents are extremely stressed out, especially, I mean, right now, our last year, we really saw parents kind of at their wits' end because the shelters placed the families in hotels. And so we had one mom tell us, like, she works third shift. She had 5 children in a room who were all trying to log onto their devices and learn during the day. She can't sleep, and, you know, she has to help them out, and the children are all close to each other and can hear. I mean, it just sounded horrible. So we understood that our parents were under a lot of stress as well. So providing that lifestyle coaching for parents, and then each family would receive groceries and gift cards for attending. And so, and during the holidays, we had, or the winter months, we had coats and shoes and other things as incentives for attending. And so we were able to screen a lot of children, and we actually found that 40% needed eyeglasses. So we were able to connect those students with resources for eyeglasses. So this is something that's really important to me to continue, just because we know that highly mobile families often lack that continuity of medical care. And we think that, you know, physical health is important for learning. And we're also going to expand this to include some of our neighborhood providers who serve our ELL families, because a lot of our ELL students do not have medical coverage. And so we often know that they are not receiving, you know, medical services. So that's one of the things we're doing. We are creating an app for our parents and students to be able to access our services, so they can access them using their cell phones. They can reach us and let us know, they can self-refer, they can let us know what services they need. So we're excited about that. We are implementing a therapeutic art program at some of our shelters. And we are also going to, this is actually with the ARP 2 funds, have group therapy for our families at the shelters. So we really want to put a lot of funding into our parent caretaker engagement. We are providing tutoring already at some of our shelters, but we're going to expand that tutoring and even see if some of our schools could use those services. But most of our schools do have after-school programming through our community learning centers. And then we are going to use the funds to expand our summer program some, because we do have a 6-week summer program. We've talked about making that program longer, as well as expanding the age group, which we did try this past summer, and we really thought it worked well. So we serve children from kindergarten to grade 8 now, where it used to be kindergarten through grade 6. We were able to expand it last year because we had McKinney-Vento rollover funds, and now that we have the ARP funds, we're going to expand it again. So those are some of our initiatives.
Those all sound very good and very needed. There was a question I'll circle back to regarding your relationships with the housing providers, which is, do you use a coordinated entry system that other agencies are also using, or do you refer from an ROI or MOU to share information?
We refer from an MOU. We do not use the coordinated entry system. We think that's out of the realm of what we do, as education service providers, but we do have MOUs with each of our shelters and with the agencies that we work with for data sharing.
Okay, we'll pause here and see if there are other questions that come in for Rebecca. Let's see.
In the meanwhile, while we wait for other questions to come in, Rebecca, I just want to ask you if you have anything that you could just impart on the rest of the liaisons who joined us today, like one thing that you feel would be good for them to know as it relates to eviction response, or it could be like ARP planning. What would you want everyone here to leave with today?
Well, 2 things. With the evictions response, I just really encourage everybody to treat that as proactive outreach, and really, when you contact families, just again, I know I said it before, but connect with them in the sense that you are just trying to provide support. Because initially, a couple of our families said, well, how did you get this information? How do you know? And so we decided to, when we contacted them, say that we have a partnership with the Evictions Court to provide you with support. And it seemed like families really responded to that approach a lot better and have been very appreciative of the support. And one other thing, we also have materials down at the Evictions Courts to distribute to the families. So when the UC Law Department works with the families, they give them materials. So sometimes we've already identified some of the families on the spreadsheet. The other thing is, with the use of ARP funding, Ohio has this whole child approach. So meaning that we know that children cannot really learn if their basic needs are not being met. And so when we're looking at equity gaps, we really have to look at the whole child. And so when I was thinking about the use of the ARP funds, I tried to think outside the box of what we typically provide, and really think more of a wraparound approach on providing services that will help families to change the trajectory of, homelessness for their families. So if we can get them, housed and provide them with mental health supports, we're addressing 2 very significant barriers. And so I would just think in those terms. These funds do have a little more flexibility, which is great. And we also know that parent and caretaker involvement really increases academic outcomes. So I always try to think of how we can reach our parents. One of the nice things about the funds is we can use them for for different things. We don't use them for incentives because we use our like private grants for that, but I think that you can actually use them for food, and you have to work out those details with your district. But I know on one of our state calls, they mentioned that you can use them for things that we typically cannot use those funds for. So if you've not been able to do certain things, I would definitely like dream big about what you can do with these funds, and you know, then check and make sure that that's an acceptable use. But I have found that most of the things that we've come up with have been things that we can use the funding for. So I just like, when I think of our programming, I always try to think of that whole child initiative. Are we meeting these children's basic needs so that they're best positioned to learn?
That is two great pieces of advice. There's two questions that came in that are kind of sort of related, so I'm going to tie them together. One is if you have school liaisons, or do they assessments? And I think this means like school site-based liaisons, and do they do assessments? And the second one is, can you expand on the role responsibility of the social worker? So two questions about staffing.
Sure. Okay. So we, our liaisons have multiple schools, with the exception of 2 of my liaisons so we have schools with historically very high numbers. And so what we were able to do with some of these funds, actually, the funds we used for these positions were the wellness funds. I don't know if every district received student wellness funds, but we did. And so they were funds that could be used for 3 years to provide certain services to students, and they called out homeless in those funds. And so we were able to use those funds to hire the academic coach, and he is only at 2 schools. And then I have another team member who is only at 2 schools, and they are both at schools with very high numbers. And so we're able to provide a deeper level of services to the students in those schools. But my other liaisons are housed here at our main office, and they go out to the schools. And so nobody in the schools actually identifies our students, but they do refer them to us. We created an online referral process, so they just really need to click on this referral form, and it populates a spreadsheet for us, and then we can go out and meet with the families or meet with the students and serve them that way. Our social worker does a couple of things for us. So social workers in our district do kind of oversee attendance. So she runs weekly attendance reports for our students, so we can identify students who are not attending or have poor attendance, and try to figure out what's going on. So she sends those out to all of our team, and everybody looks at the attendance for the students in their schools that they're attached to. She also identifies our EL families who are enrolling in the district. So she's the only one of my team members that really does work closely with enrollment, because those all come through her. So we've had a huge increase in unaccompanied youth who are coming from Guatemala specifically. And so she works with those families. We do know that if they have a paid sponsor, they don't necessarily qualify for McKinney-Vento, but a lot of those students are coming here without sponsors. And so she serves those families or those unaccompanied youth, and she identifies them for us. So her role also includes some therapeutic groups, and she is going to, we haven't started those this year, but she will be starting those at some of our elementary schools with high ELL populations. So she will hold therapeutic groups for those students, because we do feel like we have in the past maybe missed the mark on providing the same level of services to our students who are non-English speaking. We always serve them with our basic kind of frontline services, but I always, you know, encourage my team to go beyond like the letter of the law and see how we can really impact. And so I think that having her be able to provide therapy in what maybe these students' first language is important. So that is one of the things that she'll be doing. And I did specifically ask for a bilingual social worker for that reason, just so we could better serve that growing population.
All right, I'm going to wrap the last 2 questions into one again. You're very good at the 2-parters. You remember both pieces of them. And then we'll turn it over to Aleander to wrap up. But this question is, how did you start the Wellness on Wheels program? Like, who is your medical partner or agency? And then I'm going to pair that with sharing any of the out-of-the-box items that you were able to purchase this year. So specifically about your medical partner for Wellness for Wheels, how you got that going, and then the out-of-the-box items.
Okay. So for Wellness on Wheels, I actually just became aware of a local nurse practitioner who started a medical service that is mobile. So she goes to families, and she also offers families a membership so that they get ongoing medical care through her primary care facility, which is, they're called Walton Primary Care. And so we met with them and, you know, decided to try this at one of our largest family shelter on Saturdays and see how it went. And it went really, really well. We were really pleased with the outcome. So then we expanded it to our other shelters, and then we expanded it to our summer program. So every student in the summer program also received these services. Additionally, we did provide membership for our shelter students through the remainder of the school year through a grant that we received that was not a federal grant, but a local grant. So she gave us a reduced rate. Typically membership for a child is $50 a month. She provided it to us for $25 a month, which was really cool because then our families had a stable medical provider for that continuity of services. And so she actually would call each student and does call each student monthly to check in. So, well, she calls the parent to check in, see how, you know, the children are, see if there's any medical needs to need to be addressed, if they need any prescription refills, just whatever they need. So that's really awesome. And we're hoping to continue to be able to do that. We got a grant through Closing the Health Gap, which is a local organization that works on reducing health disparities in our community. So that's how we were able to do that. But I think I was just lucky. I heard about the mobile medical unit, and that's when I got the idea. So I had heard about them first, and I was like, we could take these services to our families. So I actually emailed Barbara at the time to ask if she thought it was like appropriate, because I know it was outside the box. Then as far as things that we have been able to do outside the box with the ARP funding, I will say that everything that I named, we've been able to do. I have not tried to purchase things like food or even clothing, only because we do have other grants that we're able to do that with. So I'm not sure, you know, how that would go. I know that some districts will give pushback on gift cards, specifically our district being one of them. And so we just don't use the funds for that, but I know that you can use the funds for some of those basic need items that typically you couldn't. You can even, my understanding is, even use them for cell phones and cell phone minutes, so students can stay connected to school. So we haven't tried that, only because we have other funding sources for that, just through grant writing. We partner with a local nonprofit to hold a lot of our private grants, and that way the funds are not as restricted. Just because when we have a student that needs food, we don't want to have to create a requisition and get it approved and then turn into a purchase order, and, you know, some of the red tape that some districts have, just because, and I understand, because they're overseeing federal funds, that it's important to have those checks and balances, but sometimes our families in crisis can't wait. And so we do use our other grant funds, which we can access easily, for things like food or even hotels. We have been paying for hotels sometimes, but not through those ARP funds. And Barbara, I don't know if you can speak if that's even an appropriate expense with the ARP funding.
A very short term, few days emergency to enable a child to go to school, really intended to be a bridge to a longer term solution, but definitely should not be the first stop, particularly when there are funds available, should be funds available through the COVID relief to help with that. But it definitely is something new and in a crisis, and to make a bridge to a longer term solution is allowable for sure. Just want to put parameters on it.
Yeah, that's what I thought. And I will say too, like, one of the things that we've noticed is our shelters have funding for hotel room stays even now. We had a family of 16 recently who they could not get into shelter, but the shelter did pay temporarily for a hotel with COVID relief funds. So I would really encourage everybody to kind of tap on your outside resources and use, of course, the ARP funds for things that are really emergent that you were not able to find resources for, as long as, the tie-in is to a student becoming educated, which all of these things matter, obviously, when you are attending school, that, you have some of that housing, stability, food security, basic needs being met.
Okay, well, Rebecca, thank you so much for joining us today. And I'm sure I speak for all of us here when I say that we're so gracious for all the great information that you shared today and the resources such as the MOU, which once again for everyone can be found in the handouts pane, along with a list of eviction and ARP related resources. And these will also be sent out to you after the webinar. And I'm sure that I hope that everyone here could take at least one of the things that you mentioned today back to their own communities. Thank you so much again, and thank you everyone for joining us. We hope that you'll be able to join us next week when we'll be featuring 2 liaisons who are actually part of a consortium and work together on eviction prevention in Indiana. So that will be next week, Thursday, October 7th, and we hope to see you all. Thank you so much again for joining us, and I hope everyone has a great rest of your day. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.